Well, we'll get there. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining in. This is The Middle for Men, and my name is Gary Eelman.
And I'm John Berardino.
And this is episode 5, and we're going to talk about some very interesting things today, starting out with narcissism, the definition of that, and we're going to eventually get into empathy and the spectrum between the two. I have a particular interest in this because I seem to be surrounded by a lot of narcissists, especially in the later years of my life, or maybe I just didn't know in the earlier years of my life. And John, it's kind of John's specialty. He knows a whole lot about it, and it ought to be a very interesting chat. If you get the opportunity and you enjoy the content, please do subscribe to our channel. It helps us a lot. Give us a thumbs up, and we would appreciate your comments as well. And John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, a large portion of what brought us to this topic had to do with us kind of considering a construct related to narcissism and empathy. You're talking about how there's a lot of narcissists in your life, or maybe we start to notice more narcissists coming out. It's more prominent in the news. We're starting to kind of become more relevant. It's becoming more relevant, and the kind of the colloquial language around it is because there are prominent figures that are defined as narcissists. But we talked about the spectrum here. Kind of the more standard notions of narcissism begin around just selfishness. But then if you get into like the personality disorders, which is on the far end of the spectrum, you start to see a lot of grandiosity, the overestimation and exaggeration of one's worth. But what we also notice is they're very low in empathy. That when you look at that part of the spectrum, you start to see empathy decrease. And we're saying, okay, well, what is empathy and how does it distinguish between other ideas around feeling for or feeling with other people? And you have pity, you have compassion, you have sympathy. These are very common and commonly experienced in everyday life. But empathy is special. Empathy was originally, the term itself actually came out of the 1800s, and it began around how a person views art. And so the notion of how art and the artist and viewer come into play, and there's extreme intense feeling that comes along with it. So the viewer can actually participate in the experience of what the artist demonstrated through the work itself. So more and more people started to talk about it in that way, and then Freud comes in, he starts to see it and recognizes empathy is essential when you have a psychoanalyst and the patient, and that it's a vital ingredient in order to achieve the results that the psychoanalyst or now the therapist would be considering. So when we're looking at empathy, we're saying the person has the ability to share in and to participate in the feelings of another person. And the thoughts and to understand the other person. So we're looking at the spectrum and we're saying, okay, a narcissist over here does not have the ability to do that. Perhaps is more self-centered, selfish, and self-involved. And an empath or an empathic person would perhaps be perceived as maybe more selfless and might reveal more and share more. The narcissist is going to conceal more. The empath or the empathic person is going to reveal more. Okay, and we're talking about it primarily because what we're noticing is we're very empathic people. And when we encounter others who are on the other end of the spectrum of narcissism, then we're exposed to scenarios that might be different than what we would assume. Because an empathic person would naturally kind of be in the position of saying, how would this other person feel if I said this? If I did that. Right. And a lot of my patients, what I notice when it comes to assertiveness, a lot of them hold back from communicating feelings of anger because they're worried that they might harm the other person or hurt the other person with what's being said. So a good portion of what we work on in therapy is how to communicate my anger in an effective and healthy and considerate way. Okay. So there's an ethic around that. But when you and I were talking about it, one of the things that I know we referenced was the difference between a psychologist and a surgeon, and how a psychologist has to communicate empathy to their patients, whereas a surgeon would be different.
Yeah, you really don't want a surgeon to have a lot of empathy.
Right.
sympathy maybe, but and I'm not getting that. I'm not drawing that out myself. It's not from my own experience. Although I have had a similar experience where I had a doctor who was too empathetic, and she began crying. I'm not going to make a long story out of it, but she began crying because she was in over her head, and my ex-wife was dying. And when I saw that, I just sort of panicked and said, you have to talk about this, and we need to do something. And she said, well, I can bring the chief surgeon in, and then she started to describe his personality. And I was like, well, I don't care about his personality. Is he competent? Is there a reason he's chief surgeon?
Right.
Get him in here.
Yeah.
And, he was a cocky sort of guy, but he was good and he saved her life. And so, I've actually had that experience. I think I was listening to a program one day, so I've sort of stolen that philosophy. It was actually long after that, but it made a whole lot of sense to me that I was able to go back and revisit that in my mind and go, oh, yeah, sure. You don't want a surgeon that's going to be crying over you.
Right.
Maybe he feels some sympathy someplace, but what you want is a mechanic or think of something technical that person, be it a man or a woman, feels a sense of responsibility, certainly, but they want to do the job right. They don't want to become overwhelmed with emotion to the point that they might make some critical mistake because of empathy.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And that's why it's a particular part of our life experience that we take for granted and we don't name. I think a good portion as to why we're talking about it today is because it's not named in the way in which it needs to be. You and I have discussed before the ways in which there are certain professions where narcissists tend to kind of hover.
Yeah.
And alongside that, you might also see, if you get extreme narcissism in terms of narcissistic personality disorder, you might also get psychopathy and psychopaths. You might get sociopathy and sociopaths. So, and when you have that, you have individuals who are seeking power. And then utilizing it in the service of their own goals. Which is potentially to manipulate, to exploit, or to oppress.
Yeah, you said something to me that was really quite profound to me. I remember we were talking this whole subject, and I think we were at a diner someplace, but anyway, we got into this because I'm so fascinated by it, both in politics and other areas of life. And the one thing you said to me is that empathetic people do not seek power.
No.
And that's just that's a profound statement. I mean, so do we assume then that everybody that's seeking power or a higher position or control of other people they fall somewhere else on that narcissistic scale? I can't say narcissistic scale real well, but anyway, they fall somewhere else on there. Maybe they're not, to the extreme end, right?
I think it's a position that we can take that allows us to be informed. I'd hate to just categorize it and say this is that and this is this.
Sure,
we're trying to get into a position where we have a greater level of understanding as to what that is, and to recognize that there are positions that people intentionally seek out in order to obtain power, so then they can use that to exploit, manipulate, and perhaps overwhelm others with their own particular interests. You're not going to see that with an empath. So I think what we have to be just kind of cautious of and vigilant around is what are those positions in which power is centralized. I mean, the interesting thing about our country is they recognize that the founders recognize the dangers of power and those people who abuse it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So, setting up the checks and balances were an important part of that.
Yeah.
Whenever you start to hear dictator, you assume then authoritarian, and then alongside that, you get into these other extrinsic values that we talked about before that relate to the amplification of a person's own personal interests over its citizenry and whatnot.
Right.
So it's dangerous primarily because not only has it never ever been helpful for the people involved, for the citizens and the population involved. I think what ends up happening is we start to move away from the values that embedded us in the original principles of the democracy that we have today. So I'm always suspect of positions like, for example, I know we talked about this before with the Catholic Church. in the priesthood, you have the centralization of power. And then the potential to exploit those who are a part of that. So these are things you have to be very, very just cautious of and I think vigilant around. We've also talked about oppressed empaths. And oppressed empaths have this kind of maybe what might be perceived as a wounded selfishness. You see this often with addicts and alcoholics. There's a sense of there's perhaps the presentation of someone who's really, really hurting. or perhaps really, really narcissistically involved in their addiction or whatever that might entail. And of course, it's hurting and harming. There's a lot of collateral damage around that. But they themselves are in a survival mode and self-preservation mode. And it's actually creating greater levels of powerlessness, perhaps to the point in which they actually die. You see that the opposite with others who might present themselves as being selfless. You have someone who's saying, oh, I'm doing this for the people, or I'm a public servant, these types of scenarios. So we just want to be kind of cautious and being aware of what type of personality does this individual have, and to what extent are they able to feel and to participate and share in how another person might be experiencing something uncomfortable. So that's why I think the spectrum is helpful for us. It just gives us a way to kind of orient ourselves.
If I hear you right, if you're too empathic, you can be self-destructive.
Absolutely.
Obviously,
absolutely.
The people that are feeling so bad for other people and putting themselves in their place might not be able to function in their own lives because they're stunted by this emotional wall that they can't get by. They can't get over to the other side of that spectrum to say, I can feel bad for these people and I can do what I can, but at the end of the day, I have a life to live, right?
Absolutely. So we want to be very aware of where there are liabilities in, let's say, in an empathic person. We say, what's the kryptonite for the empathic person? And a lot of it has to do with guilt and sensitivity. And a narcissist will use guilt as a weapon in order to generate destabilization of that person in some ways. So, what we'll notice that I'm mentioning art before, but movies are the greatest example of it.
Well, they play on that.
They play on that. There is not one villain there's not one villain that doesn't have a narcissistic trait of some kind.
Exactly, yeah.
So, do you remember the movie Superman 2?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where they had these other figures who came from Krypton. Yeah. And I remember the lead figure, the villain was Zod.
Zod.
Yeah. And there was this one scene where
the president, he says Zod, and he says
Neil.
Neil. Yeah. No, he had it go. He said Neil Zod. Yeah. And the president says, oh God. And he says, Zod. He corrects him.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's exactly. Yeah, I mean, it was a great movie all around. But the main character in Zod was such a perfect villain.
He was a perfect villain.
And he demonstrated, I think, what we're talking about, these extreme narcissistic, power-oriented, authoritarian traits. But there was this big fight in New York City, I don't know if you remember that, where what the villains start to notice is that the more they go after and start to attack the people, that Superman actually is distracted and tries to save them and isn't fighting them. Yeah. And there was this great scene where the female villain goes up to Zod and she says, "Oh my God, what's he doing? Why is he doing that?" And he's like, wait, he actually cares about them. Yeah. He actually cares. Like they're like shocked.
Yeah.
Like this is like so unfathomable for us. And she says, "Yeah, like pets."
Oh, like
pets.
That's I remember.
And
that
he said, I found his weakness.
Yeah.
His weakness was empathy.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
That is.
Yeah. So we have this iconic figure in American history and film and storytelling, and his weakness was empathy.
It's wild.
Right.
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. So it's an interesting, something to kind of pull apart and to notice. But yes, they were actually identifying within the story itself.
Yeah.
That his empathy and his care and regard for the other people was a witness. For them, though, it's their superpower. Their capacity to invalidate, negate, anyone and anything around them.
Yeah.
They're solely centered on their own personal goals and what their interests are. Yeah. And if anything, they're willing to remove whomever gets in their way.
Yeah.
So there's no sensitivity. There's dramatic insensitivity and disregard and dismissiveness for the other person. So it's just, I think it's an interesting piece here, especially because we talk about storytelling so much in here, and to have that particular movie demonstrated to the degree that we've talked about, I think is kind of powerful.
Perfect analogy to what we're talking about.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I think for us, it's also important for us to identify ourselves. Am I an empath?
Yeah.
Did I experience sensitivity in my childhood?
You do have some childness.
I do have some child. I'm still very much a child. But yeah, is that sensitivity from my childhood still present with me today?
Yeah.
And how does it affect and influence? So how would it affect and influence you, Gary, in your life, where you might notice sensitivity coming up for you, and then affecting or impacting your relationships?
It's a great question, and I'm actually anxious to answer it because I think over the years I've come to realize that I'm too empathetic.
Yeah.
It's not that I haven't had to make hard decisions in the corporate world and the executive world, but sometimes those bother me for way too long.
Yeah.
I don't sleep well,
Yeah.
and I always want to fix things for people. I'm just a fix-it guy. Geez, if it's broken, what can I do? Let's start here, and I think. I don't know that I would change it because I like who I am, and I would rather be empathetic than a narcissist. That's for certain. Yeah. And I, like I said, I seem to have been surrounded by narcissists, both in industry and even in my own family and friend setting. But what I've done, I think, over the past 15 years, or maybe even less, I've gotten to the point where once I recognize the person's a narcissist, and I mean truly on that side of the spectrum that I can't take it anymore, I disassociate myself with them. Yeah. The greatest example I have that's close in terms of family is my father. My father was the quintessential narcissist. He wasn't so far off the spectrum
that you want to consider where he's on the spectrum.
Yeah, he is on the spectrum. But I used to tell people, they'd meet him and they'd like him because it was affable and he would tell stories and stuff like that. And so, but it was all one way. It was 100% one way. And so my dad could spend 4 hours with you, honestly, 4 hours. At the end of the 4 hours, you would walk away. You would have heard everything that he could fit in during those 4 hours. And he wouldn't know a thing about you.
Yeah.
If I said to him, you remember John you were just talking to?
Yeah.
And he said, yeah. Well, what does he do? Yeah. Well, I don't know.
Yeah, because he's so insulated in his own his own interests. Yeah, and that's where you reference it. An empath wouldn't be that way. You want to be able to access other people as an empath. Of course, that's partly what we do. The interesting thing that you'll see in an empathic person, the superpower of an empath would be insight. Would be imagination, creativity, and maybe even in some people you'll see psychic abilities, and you'll see this also in healing professions as well. The capacity to put yourself in another person's shoes and to feel what they're feeling, and then that's what a psychologist does.
Sure.
Yeah, Carl Jung called it kind of an unprejudiced objectivity. That you remove whatever semblance of judgment that might interfere with your capacity to be able to access them empathically.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I work with all kinds of individuals who've experienced, suffering and woundedness in their life. I've never encountered that.
Really?
I haven't encountered molestation. I haven't encountered combat. I haven't, encountered lots of horrible atrocities and painful things. But yet there's something intrinsic to me that allows me to access them. And that is the empathic quality in me.
How does ego, how is that associated with narcissism? I'm really interested in that because in the industry that I was in, I mean, everybody that was, climbing the ladder and ultimately became part of the C-suite or the CEO itself, they had giant egos. I mean, just ridiculously giant egos. And also, I've read that something like 12% of all CEOs of big corporations have some sort of personality disorder, meaning they're off the spectrum, not off the spectrum, but far on the spectrum as a as a narcissist?
Yeah, I think what we want to take into consideration is, well, what's the objective? What's the goal of a CEO? What's the goal of a corporation? And I'm going to assume, you can tell me, is probably to make as much money as possible.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
is that a
No,
profit?
it's definitely money,
Okay, so
money driven.
you have orientations that are driven towards profit and the maximization of it.
Yeah.
Whereas people are not.
Right.
So it's profits over people.
Yeah.
And that's when you start to see contention exist between the workers and, let's say, those who are in the upper levels of executive.
Well, and this is striking to me, but the more I thought about this after the first time we talked about it, and you had mentioned, you had connected politicians and CEOs for me. And the more I thought about that, the more sense it made. I mean, CEOs, and I'm not talking about, look, there's a difference here, right? A small company has to have a CEO or a president or a leader or something. And we need good leadership in these companies. And if they're responsible and they take care of their people and all that stuff, we can't possibly judge them and call them a narcissist just because they want to be the head of their company. But when you get into these mega companies and the CEOs are making $20, $30, $40 million with stock and options and bonuses and that sort of thing. And what they're really doing is they really are politicians at that level. Of course, they do review the numbers. What are quarter? They report quarterlies. They talk when they're talking to the analysts. If it's a publicly traded company, and they're talking to the analysts in the stock market, they're super politicians. Super politicians. They're very polished. They have the most polished people with them. They'll generally have the CFO. They've scripted it. They know exactly what they're going to say. There's an advanced copy of what they're going to say that goes out. And that's what they stick to. And then, of course, they've got lobbyists in Washington, and they're out shaking hands. And that's what they do within their own company. Within their own company, and I've seen it over and over. The CEO of the company will go out, and he'll go out on the shop floor, or she'll go out on the shop floor, and they talk to people, and they shake their hand, glad hand them. And it's all politics.
Yeah, it's performance.
It's a performance.
It's a performance.
Yeah, and by the same token, and I've had to lay people off before. Anybody in a chief position, chief whatever, a C-suite position, and down to quite lower levels, have had to lay people off. Now, I'm not talking about firing somebody for cause. I'm saying the business is not doing well. And again, sort of the dichotomy there that exists, or the irony that exists, is that I'm the chief whatever, let's say chief technology officer. And the company's not doing well, and so I have to lay off maybe, 1,000 people or 500 people or whatever. Ironically, I think it is the C-suite that runs the company. So they've failed, and they're letting somebody go. And I've seen people in positions like that who it doesn't seem to bother that they have to let these people go, and that these people's dinners and food on the table and health care and all the benefits that go along with having a job are vanished. And the person doing the laying off doesn't seem to feel it. It just doesn't seem to happen.
I think economize is a good word to use, because mentally we have to economize how we devote and distribute our energies to those things around us. And with a narcissist, he economizes it by basically saying, I will give 99% to my personal interests, and I'll give maybe 1% to yours. Or maybe if I give you 5%, some of that might be feigned in order to give the presentation that I care. Right. Or that I have to operate in a particular way in order to maintain some level of respect or validation. One of the most important things I think we want to consider is can I carry both profit and people together? Can they coexist in a way where I can give equal amount of attention and energy to both? And that's what I think is a competent leader. I think you'd look to someone like an Abraham Lincoln, and you would say he was an empathic person. He was an empath. You could sense that.
But once again, in the world of business, and I like to go back to this because that's where I spent all my life. But I have seen empathic leaders who failed. I mean, because they were too empathic.
Absolutely. You can go too far.
In the last decade, I worked for, and I just don't ever want anybody to get anyone's name. But I worked for a guy who frankly, I loved him. I mean, he was just a wonderful, wonderful person. He was a great person.
Yeah.
He was a horrible leader.
Yeah.
And it was because he was too nice. I mean, he just couldn't make the tough decisions.
Yeah.
Before that, I worked for another leader who had a big ego, and he was narcissistic, certainly on that scale. But he was much more balanced toward the center, and he really did care about people. And if he had I was with him one night, and we had to go out to dinner, and he had to get rid of a fairly high level person at my level.
Yeah.
And he was just a wreck during the dinner. Yeah. It just really, really bothered him to have to do that.
And that's where the spectrum comes into play.
Right.
You need to know where you are on that.
Yeah.
And in certain circumstances.
Yeah. But the board wants they want someone who's at that end of the narcissistic.
Absolutely.
End, that they're not going to feel so much empathy that they're going to in any way cause the company not to be everything that it can be.
And it goes back to your story about the surgeon and your ex-wife. There's times when you need a surgeon to be in there, and maybe the OBGYN is maybe going to be a little more empathic, and she became flooded with feeling and maybe to some extent overwhelmed. So, I think for us, we're putting it out there and we're utilizing this construct as a means just to kind of play with some of the information and then to come up with some ideas about it. This isn't in a book somewhere. It's not backed by some particular type of research that they've done, but it affords us the opportunity to look at these ideas, to look at these stories, to look at ourselves and to say, okay, well, where am I on the spectrum? And in what circumstances do I need to be a little more narcissistic?
Right. Yeah. I don't know if you can make yourself I mean, I guess that's more of a question than a comment. Is can you make yourself more? I guess you can turn off your feelings to a certain extent.
I think that's what it is. Is there are going to be certain circumstances where a narcissist will tempt, and I'm saying someone who's on the extreme form of that one-sided narcissist, who will not care about your needs and feelings, and they will scapegoat you. They will blame you. They will burden you.
But so this is waiting to just sort of be blurted out from me is we have to talk about politics in that context. Just because it is what we're living in right now. It is. We're living in a cesspool of narcissism and lies and egos, and it's all about power. It's not even about money. I mean, at least if it were money, it would be something tangible. You'd say, well, the guy wants to be rich, and you may not respect that, but I mean, all this nonsense that's going on now. You have this, and I'll just say it for what it is. I know I'm going to lose some of my fans, if I have any fans, to be honest. But you got Trump out there, and he is the epitome of what we're talking about. He's at the extreme end of that spectrum. He continuously lies. Everything about him is perfect. He's never made a mistake. I mean, he really believes that. And at this stage of the game, he has stated very recently that he should have complete immunity from everything, even after he's president, even after he's Citizen Trump. That he should be able to kill somebody. This is now I'm hypothesizing, but it's true. What he's saying is that after he's president, because he was president, he should be completely held not held accountable for any law that he violates. How insane is that? And what kind of a person? I mean, that's. Is there a spectrum beyond the spectrum that he goes off on?
Well, I think what probably it speaks more to is that in other times within our country and maybe in human history, we would have been appalled. I mean, it's grotesque, it's egregious,
it's horrible.
To the point where just social norms would say that's delusional. It's delusional. It's gratuitous. It's gross. So and we come from kind of a very kind of puritanical kind of culture. So we say when you see that level of inflation, most people would say that is too much. But when you see someone say, I and only I should be immune from this and should be able to have this and be able to say that I can be a dictator, then we say that amplitude is far too much. And even whether you like them or don't like them, the reality is it can't be healthy for the society and our nation.
Well, I mean, honestly, if you believe that he's right and that he should be immune from everything and that he alone can fix things, and that's a quote, you need to move to another country. That's called an autocracy or a dictatorship. but
Yeah.
it isn't a democracy. It's not a republic. So, I mean, I don't understand it. I don't understand how so many people follow that now. What are all those people? Are they also narcissists? Are they empaths? Are they just not critical thinkers, as we talked about in excuse me, the last episode?
I think it's a combination of a lot of things. It is a complex issue. I think on the surface you could say that there's a shadow to this country. Collectively, there's a shadow that we have given ourselves over to these puritanical values. We've referenced things like the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, our freedoms, all these wonderful things, that were created centuries ago. But we've become further and further away from the principles. You see this in Christianity as well.
Yeah.
You go from beginning with Paul and kind of instituting the organized framework around Christianity, and then you have 40 some odd thousand denominations today. And that means you're getting further and further away from the basic principles of what Jesus was promoting. And we're saying the same thing here.
Yeah.
It's just a shell.
Yeah.
When people say freedom or these types of things, it's empty. Because obviously if you have someone who's waving flags and supporting Trump, then you're saying, well, you're waving a flag that doesn't represent what it was originally founded for, which is it's embedded in the power to the people and their capacity to be able to communicate their rights. And if somebody says, I'm the dictator, or I'm in charge, and I'm gonna be able to get away with things that you can't, then we obviously have a divide. And it's just words. It just becomes words. It just becomes words, and we lose the meaning and the substance behind it, which is part of what we're experiencing today.
It's sad. And to be honest, I'm a fiscal conservative.
Yeah.
I always have been. And I've worked with government a lot, and I would always tell people it's an old saying of mine: if you want to fuck something up really good, give it to the government to run. Yeah. Because they're horribly inefficient. They're money wasters. There's corruption all around. The super PACs own the Congress. Yeah. So it's not like I'm some bleeding heart liberal that believes that we ought to I'm not communist. I'm the furthest thing from that you can get.
But look at the Republican Party. It's a shell of it too.
That's what I'm saying.
So he's gone in and he's just like a virus, taking over a cell. So whatever semblance of whatever the foundational platform was for the Republican Party, all of those elements are gone.
But what does that say about? I mean, how did the Republicans? And I hate to pick party lines here, but he's the guy, he's the head of the party. How did they get to a point where they would follow somebody like that, given that Abraham Lincoln, for example, was a Republican?
Are you familiar with the sunk cost theory?
Yeah, I am actually.
It is. Yeah. It is exactly that.
Yeah.
It's exactly sunk cost. And you just keep doubling down, even though there's atrocity after atrocity. Well, we can't go back now, and that's really what it is.
But a lot of these people are afraid of losing their seat, and
absolutely,
and
it's fear.
And yet we also know that a lot of those people make more money outside of a political position. So their political ambitions aren't money; they're power. Is what they are.
It's power.
And they're not there as public servants, because if they were really there as good public servants, obviously they wouldn't be doing the things that they're doing, which is spending 75% of their time raising money and the other 25% of the time killing the country, with this ridiculous chasm that we have between the aisle.
Yeah. I think I know we talked about power versus love. Yeah. And Charlie Chaplin had that great quote where he said, you only need power when you want to do something harmful. Yeah. You only need power when you want to do something harmful.
Yeah, that's a great saying.
So what we're noticing now is when someone's trying to centralize power within themselves or a party or whatever that might entail, then they're doing it in the service of their own needs for power. Yeah. So that obviously goes against the value of what the people require. Yeah. And then we have a problem, and then we lose sight of what obviously the meaning of a democracy is. Yeah. I mean, the founding fathers were absolute geniuses. I mean, to pull these incredible minds together from what they knew and they understood, we really lose sight of just how really phenomenal it was.
Half of the people in our Congress don't know what the founding fathers did. They don't know the Bill of Rights. They don't understand the Constitution. No. They quote all sorts of ridiculous things about religion and tie it to government. I mean, it's a mess. It's just really a mess.
Well,
and these are educated, quote, educated people.
I think they're educated, and they've used their education in the service of manipulating people and getting to a position of power.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate part of what our Congress represents today. A lot of it is just really this kind of circus of people who just wanted to rise.
Yeah.
And they found out, like George Santos did. He's like, oh, Trump did this? I can do this too. All I got to do is lie a lot.
And he did.
And we're not just talking about like little lies here. We're not,
talking grandiose stuff.
Yeah, we're talking, just outrageous stuff. And it was fine.
Yeah.
It was fine for a long time. I don't know. We made it over a year, 2 years. I don't know what it was, but this is the problem, is lying has just been kind of glossed over.
Yeah.
Whereas you have what's called, I guess, considered a Christian nation, and lying now is accepted.
Yeah.
It's tolerated in the service of an agenda.
Yeah, in the same agenda.
Exactly. If it's in my agenda, then good. Okay, that's right. And I know they said that before. If Trump is going to lie, cheat, and steal for us, for my team, then it's okay.
So let's get back to narcissism and empathy and that scale. You have some other thoughts on that, I know. I'm just still, I'm digging here, right?
Yeah.
We're going down this rabbit hole. But I still want to know more about, do we know, for example, is any of this genetic? Is it nature versus nurture? Is it a combination of both? If we took, let's say, 500 people and we put them in a movie theater and we strapped to them some sort of device that could measure their level of emotion, and we put on a movie that I would cry at, for example, or the average person would cry at.
Yeah.
And then we measure it and we find out that 30-40% of the people in there don't feel anything about it.
Yeah.
I'm always shocked by that when I look at somebody who's watching something that you can't help feel emotion about. You're immersed in it.
Yeah.
And they feel nothing. It was all right. It was a movie. It was all right.
Well, and that's it. I think, again, I would say just like most things we would see, a majority of us are going to be in the middle. Okay, that's just the way that it is. And
that's where we are.
We're in the middle.
Remember that, folks. We're in the middle.
We're in the middle. So you're going to be and then you're going to have outliers. And you're going to see toxicity and destructiveness on both sides. Whether it's a tyrant or whether it's a martyr, you're going to see destructiveness. You're going to see, centralization of power or powerlessness. Yeah. You're going to see people who get mired in the abyss of their powerlessness, like you'll see, unfortunately, with addicts and whatnot. But it's good to know that, majority of people are in the middle.
Yeah.
Why then at this particular time are we driven towards narcissists or allowing narcissists to kind of envelop our society in the ways that they have? But I think, the reason as to why we originally wanted to talk about this was because of empathy.
Right.
We're saying, well, what is this empathy? Why is it that more people perhaps lean towards an empathic position that says, how would this person feel if I did? And we do this, I work with people who are on dating sites and things like this. Should I text him back? Or he didn't text me. What should I do? And how should I respond? Or if I say this, it might upset him. Or, so we're constantly in these narratives. Right. And empaths have that particular position where they're thinking about these types of things. Yeah. A narcissist, if again, as you further get out on the spectrum, aren't going to think that way. They might have like cognitive empathy, and they could say, I can I manipulate it in this situation? But it's always in the service of what they think and what they feel and what they need. Yeah. So it's very self-serving. What you're going to see in an empath, though, is they might get bogged down. So you'll see depressive personalities as you get further out if there's too much empathy. Because then to use anything that would be, and just think of it also as like, and this is a rough rubric, but we're saying selfless and selfishness. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if an empath perhaps thinks in a selfish way or acts in a selfish way, they will immediately move to guilt. So guilt then becomes the ways in which they experience that event or that person. Right. And then with guilt, you have debt. And that's where the narcissist will exploit an empath, because they will weaponize guilt as a means to hold that over the person. And then the person might say, okay, well, how can I make up for this? What recompense that I can do? And there is no recompense, because the narcissist will continue to scapegoat the individual and say, what you did is inexcusable. Sure. And I'll continue to keep using that debt to control you. So we're talking about it in the sense that we on both sides, we want you to know either side. Yeah. But I think mostly for an empath, we want them to know what a narcissist could do and how to respond to it. Yeah. And that is boundaries. And knowing that at times you will have to be selfish in moments where you feel exploited or hurt or harmed. Yeah. And that's a lot of what I do in therapy is I encourage, I would say everyone who comes into my office is on the empathic side. Everyone.
Really?
They have intrinsic values.
Because a narcissist, is unaware.
Well, it's everyone else's fault.
Yes.
It's everyone else's fault. And the empaths tend to be, the recipients.
They're not everybody to blame. The narcissists have everybody to blame.
They won't. I think that, and you're getting into personality disorders here a little bit more, where it's non-responsibility.
Yeah.
With borderline features, you're going to see non-responsibility, and they will foreclose on taking any responsibility. That's why when we were talking about Trump here, we're saying he will not take responsibility. Yeah. He even referenced saying "I'm sorry" as a weakness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, of course, he called the senator. What was the senator who was in prison now? I'm going crazy. John McCain called him a loser.
Yeah. He called all veterans suckers or soldiers, suckers and losers. So that is definitively wrong.
I don't understand how his own party at that point. McCain was a Republican, of course. I don't know how anybody in the party stomached the guy after that. I don't know. I thought that was the end of him. I thought, well, he's done now.
Yeah, I think that's the danger.
Yeah.
You see this with other political figures throughout human history, most notably in the last century with Hitler, where he continued to keep getting away with thing after thing, right. And, the whole thing with Neville Chamberlain. And
would it be fair to say that if you're a person who's wondering if you're a narcissist, that you're not?
Yeah, if you're concerned, and I've had people come into my office and say, I'm worried that I'm a narcissist, or my wife says I'm a malignant narcissist, all this stuff on the internet and everything. Like, if you're asking me, then you're not.
Yeah.
If you're asking me, then you're not, because that means you're concerned about it.
Yeah.
Now, you could say maybe like, I've done narcissistic things or things that are selfish and self-centered and hurt and harmed other people through that. But that means you're here because you want to try to reconcile that or resolve that. You want to get better. You want to fix it. You want to improve. You want to change.
Yeah.
Those aren't elements as you get into the narcissistic end of the spectrum that you're going to see, because they're going to blame.
Yeah.
And that's what Trump does. He just puts a finger. That's the imperviousness of him. That's where you see the Teflon nature of that he's there. Because if he does something wrong, he'll just blame someone.
Yeah.
And then he gets away with it. This is an orientation you'll see in children.
I just saw you finish that thought if you want to.
Well, I just saying to note that it's a very primitive part of a person that we all have, but then we acclimate to society and we take on social norms, and we realize that in order for me to get by and have healthy relationships, I need to compromise. Yeah.
I was going to say, I just saw The Equalizer again. I hadn't seen it in years. I think it's the last one where he's in Italy. Mm-hmm. And he's all shot up, and this doctor who is in the town and has taken care of everybody and birthed them and everything else. He's taken Denzel Washington in, and he says to him, he's really in bad shape, and he looks at him and he says, "Are you a bad person or a good person?" And Denzel thought about it. He's laying there in a lot of pain, and he said, "I don't know." And so the doctor left. And I don't know, sometime later, he's healed up and everything. He says to the doctor, he says, "Why, when you asked me if I was a good person or a bad person, why did you continue to take care of me?" He said, "Because a person that would answer that way, only a good person would answer that question that way."
Yeah, and I think that's an example of a story giving us insight into ourselves.
Yeah.
And it really allows us to say, I could relate to that.
Yeah.
And I could feel something when that line was delivered.
Yeah, I could.
Yeah. And that's really impactful storytelling.
In fact, I wondered about it for like after the movie. I kept laying there thinking,
absolutely,
is that true?
Yeah.
Maybe that is true. Only a person who would question their own, right? I mean, it's the same with empathy and narcissism.
Yes,
I think.
Absolutely. And that's where I'm hoping that we can use this construct of a spectrum to help other people, our audience, know and to understand, well, where am I on it?
Yeah.
And what would indicate that I am? Yeah. Are there tendencies? Are there are there outliers in terms of behavior? And there are, I mean, I've had clients who've unfortunately been unfaithful to their wives, and we're saying, well, what was this like, and what led up to it, and how did this occur? I'm a bad person, I don't deserve her love because of what I did, and things like this. And I'm saying, okay, are you saying you're a bad person overall? Are you just saying it because of that situation, because you did a bad thing? Is this something you feel is redeemable? These are all questions that we have to explore. Right. Therapy, it gives us an opportunity to explore that. So we want to say, I want to know my enemy, like, okay, who's on the other end?
Right.
But I also need to love my enemy in some ways and accept before I can change or maybe even adapt to what's going on.
Sure.
So that means a knowledge of, and maybe even empathizing with a narcissist.
Yeah.
And that's where the strength and the superpower of the empath comes into play, where you start to wonder and to develop insight into what that other person is.
I think I can feel empathy for a narcissist who's going through, some horrific thing, whether it's, no matter what it is, I think I don't judge people immediately because they're a narcissist or anything like that. So I think I could.
Yeah.
But some people, there's just not a chance I'm feeling sorry for them, no matter what happens to them.
Right, and that's an important piece. That they were saying, okay,
I'm going to protect myself from that.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but empathy is also a tool to understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is a tool to understand. So that's where we want to sharpen that tool and to see it as a strength. Mm-hmm. I can say, I can understand where you're coming from. I don't agree with it. Mm-hmm. And I will not partake in it. Mm. Okay? I can understand where you're coming from. Yeah. I don't agree with it, and I will not partake in it. In fact, I might even mobilize to protect myself from it or others.
Yeah.
That's a nuanced way of seeing yourself on that spectrum.
Right.
And that's where I think the improvements will come just overall in regards to how we relate to these two variables in terms of personality. Yeah.
So getting toward the end of this, I guess summing it up for me is that we just live in this world, and this is not a disease. Well, it might be under your guidelines as a psychologist or something. There's certainly a diagnosis for it. Right?
As you get further out on the spectrum, we would call it a disorder. Yeah.
But it's not something that, virtually it is what it is. The narcissists that are out there, and the empathetic people are going to be empathetic, I think all their lives, right? There's no skill training for this to say I can't not feel for you.
No, I think again it's honing it and becoming aware of it, conscious, conscientious, deliberate, and that takes like you're sharpening a tool, like you're developing a skill. Yeah. A narcissist will develop the skills, the superpowers that they have.
Yeah.
There's plenty of individuals out there who've utilized their narcissistic personality as a means to accelerate their goals in life and to rise to the top, make more money, whatever that might entail.
Yeah.
But we need to consider it also for empaths as well.
Yeah.
How can I sharpen these tools that I have, my imagination, my creativity? Perhaps there's psychic abilities there, whatever that. There's insight. There's a means to understand another person without experiencing what they do.
Yeah. I guess I have a hard time understanding. This all gets into a blender for me, and I know, because you have a PhD, you probably got these things in a whole lot better boxes than I do. But I have a hard time understanding the average Trump supporter supporting a guy, and we're back in politics again, but I think it's important. I think it's an important and timely subject. The average Trump supporter who has no money, is maybe making an average wage or whatever, knowing that this guy literally, and I don't mean this figuratively, literally sits on a toilet made of gold, and thinking somehow as a blue collar worker, maybe making I don't know, who knows, 50 grand, 75 grand a year, that Trump is on his side and out to help him or anybody in a. We have these communities, of course, that are they have no voice. They've been marginalized. We have all sorts of cultural situations similarly, and how anybody in those situations could think that Trump is out for them when he's clearly and obviously only out for himself. I just can't make that connection. It's like I don't know what they are. It's like, who are you? Are Are you empathic? I don't think so. I mean, sir, that's not what's driving you to think about this. Is it just some hope that he's some God that's going to save the world, and he's playing on their? He's driving their fears, right? Isn't that really what it is?
It's fear is a large portion of it. Absolutely. It's also creating narratives around fear that then promote the pedestalization of the person.
Yeah.
The Catholic Church obviously was notorious for doing that.
Yeah,
They're saying you're going to go to eternal hell if you don't ...
Yeah.
If you don't do this with the border or ... whatever that might be, then there's going to be an invasion.
Yeah.
It's using fear to exploit basic, primitive, human positions that we have. So from there, you need a savior. The Führer actually means savior, and you coming from a Christian society, we would say, yeah, we look for saviors, and it's even in healing professions, and we look up to gurus, and these cults that are established in order to try to. Someone has the knowledge, someone has the ability to save me, rescue me, fix me, whatever that might be. And it creates tremendous exploitation of the people that are involved.
So the bottom line of that, I mean, if you're looking at a root cause analysis and you're following it down the path, in my mind, it seems to get to fear. Fear is the common denominator for all of that.
Yes. Yes. Fear. And what we're saying in empathy, the central variable is always love. Yeah. And that's why when you get away from love and you move towards power, then exploitation, manipulation, and these types of scenarios exist. And that's what you're seeing. There will come a day where these Trump supporters will have to come back into the fold. It's very similar to what happened after the Civil War.
Yeah.
And Abraham Lincoln talked about this as well. There's a great, interesting story. It's probably a little bit kind of myth, but one of his cabinet members saying, we need to punish the South.
Yeah.
And he said, we need to make sure that they learn their lesson in some ways.
I know about this story, yeah.
Yeah, and he says, do I not make my enemy my friend?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's what we want to look at here. If we're looking at an enemy, we have to find ways to bring them back into the fold.
Yeah.
So
I don't perceive, and I never did.
Yeah.
Perceive the far right, Trump supporters. I never saw them as my enemy ever.
Yeah.
But I did see them as somehow derailed in terms of you've lost your way, pal.
Yeah.
And love is the only answer, and you seem to be filled with hatred, and hatred is born of fear. It's like I don't know if this holds true, but my thought has always been that everything that you hate is born of fear.
Yeah.
That's really what you're saying. Mm-hmm. When you're saying I hate this guy, you hate him because you're afraid of what he can do.
Yeah.
I mean, and I've always, again, from a young age, I've always said I will not live my life in fear of anything. And I think that offers up, if you can make that commitment and live with it, I think that offers the opportunity for a whole lot of space to open up and for that to become filled with love. Love for your fellow human being, love for those who are suffering, and there's God knows how much suffering there is in this world. I mean, I literally get emotional, and that's how I'm pretty sure I'm an empath or empathic person, is that I will contemplate the suffering in the world when I see it, and I don't close my eyes to it, and I'll become overwhelmed by it, and I think. I get distressed by it. I get disturbed by it. I'm like, what can I do about this? Somebody has to do something about this. And I live a modest life, but we can all do something about it. And even if it's only that we recognize that it's there, that's got to be a foundation for us to build upon, to act, and to change things. And change is the most important thing. And the oddity of that for me is that change is the only constant in life, and yet. We could make that change a positive change and move toward a better society, not only in our own country, but worldwide, where babies are fed instead of being starved. Children don't have to work in mines to get the lithium and the cobalt and things they need to make electric cars for rich people. Yeah. And people have honor and what's the word I'm looking for? Self-gratification in the work that they do, so they can live a normal, decent, happy human life that we envision. That's not what the world is, though, and that bothers me.
It will take an empathic person to restore the division that was created over the last 8 years. It just will. It has to, because without Lincoln, we wouldn't have a country today, and that's a fact.
Yeah.
He put the Union before all other interests involved, and those people who wanted the South to be punished didn't see it in that way. So that's what I'm saying, is that we have to see that at micro levels and at macro levels, that rupture and repair is the part of any healthy experience. And I think those are the challenges that we need to kind of probably look forward to as we move, kind of through some of these very dangerous scenarios in our society today.
Well, this has been, I mean, I could go on and talk about this for hours, right? And I don't know I hope our viewers feel the same way. But what would your final, I mean, you're an expert in this, John,
Yeah.
and I'm a novice. I just like to ask questions. I'm really good at asking questions, by the way. But I don't have a large knowledge base, not in this area. But so what would be your counsel if you were to look into that camera and say, how should people deal with this dichotomy that we live in?
Acceptance, meaning that's removing whatever semblance of judgment that might have interfered with your capacity to be able to access the other person. Most of us have empathic abilities, and we can assume or maybe assess what's going on in relationships that we have, or even within us. The whole notion of loving your enemy is not necessarily designated for people outside of you. It's for the parts of you, perhaps, that you have already assigned as being bad or sinful or problematic or not enough. So we want to take a position of acceptance that begins within ourselves. In therapy, that's essentially what we're trying to do, is to get to a place where we can acknowledge that there are shadow parts of myself, wounded parts of myself, and I need to find a way not to judge them, but to utilize my empathic abilities to access where I'm suffering and to do my best to love that part of myself. I think, it begins within conquering yourself, absorbing and integrating the parts of you that might have been segregated or neglected or rejected or that are undeveloped. And then we can bring that out into our society and the relationships that we have. So, utilizing this construct, I think, will help us, just because it's a platform for us to kind of orient. But then there's much, much more that we need to know along the way. So we're constantly building our knowledge, and we're constantly using it in the service of improving ourselves and the relationships that we have. Yeah.
So I'm Gary Yeoman. This has been The Middle for Men. And John?
And I'm John Baradino, and thank you for watching.
Thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Again, if you enjoyed the content, please hit the subscribe button. I can't say subscribe. I'll say it again. Subscribe button. There we go. Thank you.
Take care.
Interesting subjects today, including narcissism. I'm just a mess.
Did you drink this morning, Gary?
No, but I should have.
Maybe.
About empathy and the different dynamics and the definition of what they mean.
It's okay. Just couldn't get it out.
I got my teeth. I got my tongue caught between my teeth. If you want to know the definition,
you have to wax your teeth, Gary. You can get that tongue off of there.
Oh, right. I gotta recover from this. Oh boy, man, my face is all red now. I need makeup.
Makeup.
Makeup.